Morning. So I am Sean, and I work in developer relations at Google, particularly on business messaging. That's kind of a tough act to follow after all that handshaking. But so what I'm going to be talking about, there we go, this morning is a couple different platforms that Google is building that allow businesses to connect with consumers. And that could be like a chatbot experience, or for consumers to basically connect with businesses. But before I go too far, I wanted to, I know it's early, so I want to give you guys something additional interactive to do besides the handshaking. And I'm going to take a second to kind of poll the audience here. So if I can have everybody just take out their smartphone. I'm assuming you have a smartphone. You can take it out for a second and just open it up to the home screen. So I want to get a show of hands of everybody in here that their default SMS, MMS app is on that home screen. So this could be iMessage, it could be messages by Google, Samsung Messages, something like that. So pretty good amount of people. I'd say definitely over half. Now stay on your messaging app and just open up the list of conversations and scroll back through the last 20 or 30 conversations. And let's get another show of hands of how many people in those last collection of conversations received a message from a business. So this is probably over a short code or long code, potentially a two-factor authentication, fraud alert, yeah, so a lot of people. And that's not too surprising because this whole business of businesses essentially sending their consumers SMS is a really, really big business, and it's something that I certainly didn't put a lot of thought into until I started kind of working in this market, but there's actually about 2 trillion of these business SMS sent from businesses to consumers every day, or every year, sorry, which represents like a huge, huge business. This is like a $50 to $70 billion worldwide market. And these are things like two-factor authentication codes, fraud alerts, and so forth. And the reason, even though this is a 25-year-old technology, that businesses continue to depend on this is because if you have a cell phone, essentially you can be reached by a business if they have your phone number. So it's the largest messaging platform in the world by a long shot, even more so than something like email. The other advantage is that it's also one of the best inboxes in the world. As you saw, most of the people in here have that app on their home screen, and the read and open rates on SMS is really, really high. So it's tremendously valuable to businesses. But despite the fact that it's very valuable, there's definitely some problems with SMS. So this is what a business SMS looks like in kind of all its glory. You can see it's sent from a short code, could be a long code or maybe alphanumeric, and it's essentially just a plain text message. And businesses are restricted to the restrictions of SMS, which is essentially 160 characters. So businesses have to be very, careful or strategic about what they're putting into their message, and they have to use rather, I guess like non-natural language to express what they want to put into 160 characters. And the other thing is that on this platform, businesses spend a lot of money on their branding, on their logos, on the way they talk to customers and who they are as a business. All of that goes away on this platform because it's plain text and there's no logos, there's no identity for who the business is. And we have no pictures, no videos. This is a pretty jarring experience for someone who's using basically computer in your pocket in 2019. And there's no read receipts, as well as very limited interaction. Essentially, the interaction that happens on business SMS is someone maybe tapping a link and going to a website. So of those like 2 trillion messages, almost all of those are essentially one-way communication. So what can we do about that? Well, Google's been heavily investing in this area on a technology called Rich Communication Services, or RCS. And RCS, like SMS or MMS, is a telco standard. It's not something invented by Google. It started 8 to 9 years ago and then has only recently started to gain traction through Google's interest in backing into it. So the advantages that you get with RCS as basically on peer-to-peer communication is similar to what you would expect on like a modern messaging app through WhatsApp or iMessage or any of these like over-the-top apps where you're getting rich media, video sharing, typing indicators, all that kind of good stuff. And then RCS Business Messaging, or you'll probably hear me refer to it as RBM, is essentially the business messaging platform that leverages RCS channel for businesses. So essentially a business can talk to a REST API to create experiences like this delivered to the default messaging experience on someone's cell phone. So you get the advantages that you have with SMS, where this is someone's default app on their phone, but you can create these kind of rich messaging experiences where you can send them a rich card with an embedded QR code so that they can check in for a flight. We have branding for like the real business. Well, this isn't a real business, it's a made up business, but Bonjour Rail in this case, and you see the logo, and we can do things like help the user actually respond by giving them chips or suggestions to be able to just tap on those suggestions and interact with the bot. And then we can even, because it's the fact that it's essentially a computer, you can link into other experiences on the phone, like Google Pay, Google Maps, maybe even your own app. So what goes into one of these series of interactions? So with RBM, we talk about agents. You can essentially think of it like a bot. You can use those interchangeably. And an agent or a bot is essentially just a series of interactions that's happening between the business and the consumer. And you can see a couple different example experiences there on the right. One is for applying to jobs, and the other one is for actually ordering food. These are real experiences that people have built. So what happens with one of these series of interactions, essentially, is that, what's going on? There we go. The first thing is we need to actually understand what the user needs to do. And you're going to hear, I'm sure, a lot about this kind of idea of user's intent, which comes from natural language processing. And essentially, it's the meaning behind different expressions. If I say, hello, hi, welcome, how are you, essentially, the intent behind those expressions is the same thing. I'm greeting you or I'm welcoming you. So the first thing we need to do as a bot or a platform is understand what the user's trying to do. Then we need to map that to some sort of business lookup or business logic. And when constructing a response on RBM, essentially, we have someone asking a question like, how much data do I have left this month? Well, we're going to go figure out what that means, look it up in a database probably, and then package it up. And the advantage of RBM is, since it's a visual medium, we can not only respond with text, but we can actually attach like an image of the representation of that. And if you're a software engineer, you're pretty familiar with carrying out these steps like 2, 3, and 4. We do that all the time. If you've ever built a website, you built an app, essentially, you're always like fetching data based on user behavior and then rendering it to the user. The hard part here is really the first thing, which is understanding what users want to do, especially on a conversational medium like messaging. But we've recently reached a point with, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of talks about this today, but where we've reached a point with kind of conversational AI and natural language processing research where we can actually as a non-expert in machine learning or natural language processing, create these kind of conversational experiences. As you saw a second ago when the slide came up, RBM is like this nice and unique mixture of both like a graphical user interface, so where we have chips and cards and carousels and these types of things that help direct user action, but also mixed with a conversation. And this is happening in the same place that I'm chatting with my family or my friends or whatever. So it makes sense that we can, we need to be able to talk and converse with the bot. And that is, this mix is very powerful and very transformative, but it's also complicated to sort of design and build for. And as I mentioned, we're really starting to kind of get to a place with tooling, like tools like Dialogflow or IBM's Watson, where we are able to create and leverage this kind of power of conversation mixed with graphical user interface. There we go. So, and this kind of transformation or paradigm shift happens in computing every 10 years or so with the way that consumers interact with technology. If you think like back in the 70s, we had mainframes, 80s, we had desktops, then we had internet, and then mobile phones. And if you think about like imagining the world without the internet today, it's pretty hard. Like the being there, if you were alive for the kind of transformation of everyone being connected online, it was a major, major shift in the way that we access information. And same with mobile. Now we all carry around basically computers in our pocket, and there's maybe good and bad that comes with that, but it's certainly changed the way that we consume information and interact with businesses. And then now I believe we are on the cusp of another transformation or paradigm shift in the way that consumers are interacting with technology, which is AI, assistance, conversation. And where RBM fits into that is really a platform that brings conversation directly into that kind of home screen or that inbox for users. So we can leverage this power of NLP, conversational AI, directly into someone's inbox. So I don't give a lot of, so I'm not a real like thrill seeker. I don't climb mountains or jump out of airplanes and stuff, but I do give a lot of live demos, which come with their own collection of thrills, because there's nothing more thrilling than failing spectacularly in front of a room full of people. So this is an actual RBM agent. This RBM agent was created for Googlers. It's called EatBot. And what it does is, if you've ever been to a Google campus or you're aware of this, is Google has a lot of cafes or restaurants, especially in the Mountain View campus. And this bot essentially allows Googlers to browse and see what cafes there are, what food is available, and then subscribe to different menus and get alerts about them. Or even be able to do things like, I only want to see vegetarian food, or I only want to see Indian food. So you can also see that EatBot, so it says, welcome to EatBot, nom nom nom, time to get your eat on. So one of the things with something like conversation AI, especially from a business to a consumer, is that you want like the language of the business or the bot to sort of match the language of the person consuming that. So EatBot's kind of cheeky in its language because it's basically talking to software engineers at Google. So you probably wouldn't do this necessarily for certain types of businesses, but this kind of language, I think, resonates with Googlers. So what I can do here is I can say, I want to see cafes near me. And there's not going to be any cafes here, but I can search for one. Oops. I'm just going to, oh, just a second. All right, we'll do Googleplex. So that's in Mountain View. And when I share my location, basically my lat and long, or the location I shared, is going to be shared back to the bot. And then we're going to go and look up different cafes that are available at the main Googleplex. So we can see Yoshka's, Slice. So these are all different cafes. And you can see also the ones that only support like lunch. You can view the location. Some of them also have dinner. And then we can go and grab, let's grab the lunch menu for Mixit. And then this will tell me the opening time and basically what's available for food today. And then I can subscribe to that feed, and then each day I'll get an alert 10 minutes or so before it opens, so I know what there is for lunch today. So we have people like Google using this today. It's a good way for us to test the actual platform, and it's also a way to kind of serve the ecosystem at Google. So I'm going to switch over to another one, another bot here. So this is Acme Bank, which is a fictitious bank that I made up. But the idea is it just kind of supports things that you would expect from maybe a banking conversational experience. So I can say I want to open an account, and it's going to tell me that I need to come in. So one of the differences, one of the things with the EatBot app is, even though I was like clicking around and it serves my purposes to show me cafes and stuff, I wasn't really having much of a conversation with it. I was basically just kind of going down a deterministic flow, similar to what you would with like an app or a website. But Acme Bank's actually hooked into an NLP model that I built with Dialogflow. So rather than just interacting with it purely through the menus, I can actually ask for stuff. I want to transfer $250 to my checking account. So I can send that off, and essentially that slide that I had earlier where we talked about detecting users' intent, it's going to carry that out by talking to a Dialogflow model that I created, understand that the user actually wants to transfer $250 US from savings to checking, confirm that, and then I can use chips, because it's on RBM, to direct the conversation and respond yes. And then we'll do one more here. What was my spending on Amazon last month? So with any of these kind of like conversational queries, I could of course go back through the menus and carry it out, but it's similar to being like interacting with a phone tree, where it's going to have to ask me for each of these steps. It's not very natural, and you can certainly learn the behavior of the bot that way. But the nice thing as well is that since this is a conversational medium, it's just messaging, I should be able to actually interact with the bot by asking for specific things. So that's what's happening here. All right, if you can just switch back to the slides. Great. All right, thank you. So that is RCS Business Messaging. which is all about how sort of transforming or upgrading that 2 trillion SMS messages that are being sent from businesses to consumers. So all of those conversations that are happening on that platform are really about initiated from the business, because the business needs to know what the person's phone number is. But what if we want to go the other way? The user actually wants to initiate the conversation with the business. So that's the second half of the talk here I'm going to talk about is another platform called Business Messages by Google, which is about users essentially initiating conversations with consumers. Oh, all right. So the way, so recently I was on a flight, or I was waiting for a flight, and while I was waiting for my flight, I actually realized that I had lost my credit card. So I'm in this airport, essentially waiting to get on the flight, and I don't have my credit card. So what do? So I used Google to look up the customer service phone number for Chase Sapphire, and I got on a phone call with them in the airport. And I had to go through, your normal phone tree, and eventually got to a live person. And then I'm in an airport surrounded by hundreds of people, and I have to essentially give personally identifying information over the phone loud enough for them to hear things like my last 4 digits, my social, my date of birth, my home address, and stuff. So I was probably already setting myself up for fraud in the future. I finally got through it. They canceled my card, and they sent me a new one over FedEx. The whole process took 25 minutes, while also basically yelling out all this personal information in front of a room full of people. And I remember even a couple months ago, I had to call Air India, and I was on hold for 2 hours. And then when they finally did call me back, it was 3 in the morning. So I'm sure that this kind of experience with customer service phone calls is probably not unique to me. I'm sure everybody in this room has some sort of horror story where they've had to reach out to a business and it was not an idea. So this business is gigantic. There's $1.3 trillion spent from businesses basically fielding 264 billion phone calls a year. So it's a massive, massive business. It's even bigger, at least from the dollar sense, than business SMS. And for the most part, it's not a great experience. If you do the math on that, businesses are spending somewhere between $4 and $6 to field these phone calls. And then it's a terrible experience for the consumer. I always kind of laugh at this slide where it says 3% of customers enjoy using IVR, because I'm I'd really like to meet the 3 people out of 100 that said yes. But I think they were probably just trolling or accidentally selected yes on the survey. But the whole thing is it's not great for the consumer, and it's bad for the business. And the reality is that, can you go to the next? Google is part of the problem here. Google generates a ton of call volume. 60 to 80% of phone calls originate on a website, which is basically traffic that's delivered from Google property. And billions of phone calls are initiated, just like you saw in the Chase Sapphire example that I talked about earlier, directly from Google. So what can we do with that? And here's a specific example of a US pizza chain that receives 59 million phone calls from Google a year. So if you think about $4 a phone call, that's a pretty expensive proposition to basically handle all those phone calls. So how can we change that? The idea of a phone call today is, especially for the generation that's growing up with technology, smartphones, and internet, a phone call is a pretty invasive experience. It's like someone going and ringing your doorbell in the middle of the day. But we all message. Messaging is essentially the killer app that exists on smartphones today. So what we're doing is we're bringing messaging directly into the main Google properties for where you actually interact with businesses. So that's Maps, that's Search. So we're trying to meet sort of consumers where they're already initiating those conversations with businesses. Except today, those conversations are happening over a phone call. We can redirect them into a messaging conversation, which could be with a live agent, or it could be with a chatbot, or some sort of mix of those two. A demo of the experience here. So this is actually live, King of Prussia. So I think you might have to put in Pennsylvania there as well, because it's location specific. But essentially, this is called Playsheet. And you can see, in this case, a messaging button's been enabled beside the call button. And if you click that on an iOS device or on an Android device, it's going to launch into this conversational UI where you can actually chat with the business. And some of those chats will start with a chatbot, and then they might escalate to a live agent, or it might be complete with a live agent. I think you can do the same thing with the Google merchandise store as well. So today, this technology is launched in sort of a pilot mode with a number of businesses, and it's mostly text. We launched initially just plain text. So you see the logo of the business and the name of the business, but there's not all the rich kind of conversational stuff that you saw with the RBM platform today. And then just recently we launched where we have support for photos. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see our plans for sort of 2020 is to start to build this out to be more of a rich conversational experience, similar to what we have on the RBM platform. So it's carousels and cards and suggestions and so forth, along with all the parts of like the conversational AI that we can have. All right, and I think we're going to try one more live demo of this guy. And I'm going to need a little bit of help. Oh, can you switch back to my phone? Sorry. All right, so we'll start on maps. So I'm going to search for Sean's Poutineery, which is actually, that's a picture of my parents' home. And you can see that there's a message button there. So I can say message. And that's going to start a conversation with this business. So I'm going to just type in hello or hi. And in this experience, if you switch back to the other tab there, this is actually talking to a live agent. There's no reason that this couldn't also be talking to a bot or a combination. So Stefan, if you can just type back hello, that's fine. So one of the things that is happening here that in addition to just the live chat, which is pretty simple, but we're launching directly from Maps, is that we live, especially if you look at like a country like Canada. Canada is a bilingual country, so people coming into the conversation could be speaking different languages. So what I've done in this is that I've used Google's translation technology to essentially auto-detect the language that the user's speaking, and then it can translate on the fly. So if I say, bonjour. So I do bonjour, ça va. It's going to detect on the other side that I am speaking French. So it says the original language is French, and then it auto-translates to basically what the bot or the human would understand. And then if Stefan responds, it's going to auto-translate back to the language that I'm speaking. Oh, not sure what that says, but. So, yeah, so that's English. So then we can go hola, and basically we can keep switching back and forth on the fly. Now, normally probably someone's only going to be speaking 1 or 2 languages, but this demo is kind of just to show the power of incorporating something like modern machine learning, like Google Translation. These are all cloud APIs that you can use, and we can basically auto-detect languages. Because one of the things that we found on this platform when we launched it is we always, every conversation ends with essentially a CSAT score, which we use to evaluate the quality of the platform. But if you come into a messaging experience with a business and you're speaking a language that they don't recognize, you're automatically going to get a really poor CSAT score because essentially the person or the bot can't respond in a way that the user can understand. So by using something like Google Translation, maybe you can't carry on an in-depth conversation about politics, but you can certainly help set expectation for the user in terms of what you can handle or express to them in their own language that they need to converse in whatever the language is that your platform supports. And one of the other issues is that since modern phones are all localized, typically when you're interacting with Google Maps or some other platform on the phone, it's in the language that they expect. So if I'm a Spanish speaker, my phone's probably going to be in Spanish, and if I suddenly go into a messaging conversation where it's all in English, it's quite a jarring experience. So if you can just switch back to my slides. That is it. So that's both the 2 platforms, basically RBM or RCS Business Messaging. So that's businesses starting and initiating conversations with consumers, and then Business Messages by Google, which is a P2A or person-to-application platform where users can initiate conversations directly from search or from maps with businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiko. We're going to applause. Hold on. We're going to do some Q&A. Thank you, Sean. So does anyone have a couple questions? All right. I'll come to you. If you ask questions, you get a ticket.
I'm wondering if you have any idea of when RCS will be widely available.
So I didn't get into it, but one of the challenges, of course, with the RCS business messaging platform and also RCS in general is it is a telecommunication standard, so it does depend on a lot of things outside of, say, Google's control, such as carrier adoption, adoption by phone manufacturers, and so forth. So today we are launched in a number of different countries. We are launched in Mexico, Brazil, UK, France, and the United States, but that represents mostly a subset of those populations. The country that we have the largest reach in is in Mexico, where we have very good relationships with Telcel and Telefonica, and they represent a large portion of the reachable users there. And there's also, this platform only works on Android today, and there's a lot of Android users in Mexico, so there's advantages there. But to kind of comment on like RCS as like widely available everywhere, like let's say the United States, it's a little bit tricky to necessarily like give you a definitive answer. I know it feels like maybe a cop-out, but it's depending on a lot of things that are outside of certainly my personal control, since it depends on carriers and agreements and things like that. But there is a real effort in the industry, especially now with Android, I believe mandating that RCS clients have to be available on new versions of Android, and RCS support has to be there. So we are starting to make a lot of headway in terms of adoption around the world.
Yeah, a question about the multi-language capability you referenced at the very end there. Mm-hmm. Are you saying there's a specific NLU engine for each language, or are you using auto-translate to go from the questioner's initial language to whatever your base language is, presumably English, then doing the NLU and the response lookup on that, and then translating the English response back to the original language?
So there's a couple of ways you could do that. So certainly one way would be you auto-translate into the language that you built, like let's say it's a bot, and you built a bot in Dialogflow in English, then you'd probably want to translate things into English and then try to match intents against that. And I think if it's simple enough language and queries, you could certainly do that. The other way to do it, especially if you are, say, building chatbots in like, let's say Canada, where you're going to deal with English and French speakers, you could create separate models that both understand English and French.
Is there a way for businesses to track what is the absolute volume of contacts that's originating for them on Google?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part?
Is there a way to track what is the absolute volume of contact originating on Google for their businesses?
For which for the RBM platform?
No, generally. So you mentioned that trillions of calls originate for businesses on Google. Mm-hmm. Is there a way for businesses to track that?
Oh, sorry. Okay, so you're talking about how can a business track how many phone calls are generated from a Google property? I mean, there's not like a way that you could go to a dashboard on Google and just like put in your domain name and see how many phone calls were generated. But certainly from like a programmatic sense, you can track that a user is actually coming from a Google domain. And then if you have, the tricky part is if they type in the phone number on the device, there's not really a way to link from the fact that they went to your website and then initiated a call, unless you can identify them later. But you could certainly track if you can initiate a phone call from like a click on your website, then you can have statistics around that. So you could kind of track the full funnel of the person coming from Google and then clicking on the phone call and initiating the phone call. But the tricky part is when they they break the chain there and they type in something manual.
Thanks, Shan. It was a very nice presentation, very nice ideas. But you know that whenever we would like to implement such kind of conversation in a real business scenario, especially in the financial sector, or for healthcare, the most important problem is the data security. Right. So, like, if the doctors and if the doctors and the patients communicate to each other using the SMS system or chatbot system, there are a lot of sensitive information they exchange, right? So what is your opinion to protect such kind of a sensitive information?
So you're talking about, let's say you're in a situation where you need to transmit sensitive information over the platform, like in the case of like healthcare. I mean, I think the reality is that we're not in a place where the platform we can support a use case like that. We would not encourage people to, not that the data is not secure, but it is still existing in a messaging thread on your phone, which if someone accessed your phone, they could see. But I think long term, we are investigating solutions like being able to have like an OAuth session that you could authenticate against the business, and then you could basically transmit that maybe something more securely that maybe lives for a certain time, or you could even have things where you can walk down the conversation, similar to like an app. So if you look at apps in the space of like One Medical or these kinds of businesses, they have messaging built in the app, and you can transmit things back and forth, and that's happening over a secure channel. And then also in addition to that, the app is secure itself, where you have to log in order to access that sort of stuff. So similar types of behavior are things that we could potentially support. At the moment, again, the platform's not really set up for that kind of stuff. If we look at the RBM platform, we're really focused on how can we upgrade those 2 trillion SMS that exist today and make it a significantly more enhanced experience. And when we make that successful, then there's all kinds of things that we can potentially do to start to move into other messaging space.
Thank you. I actually have 2 questions. Will RCS require the users to download a new app to their phone? And then the second question is, how is this, well, frankly, superior to Twilio? Thank you.
So the first question, the downloading an app. So ideally, no. So we work with OEMs, phone manufacturers all over the world that we have partnerships with, where they are making essentially when you go out and you buy a new Android device, the default messaging app would be an RCS client. So that could be messages by Google. If it's on Samsung, then it could be Samsung messages. We have a partnership with Samsung to make this experience interop between devices. Now, if you're dealing with an older phone that doesn't have one of those, then in that situation, and you were like, I really want to have this today, you would have to go and download an app from like the Play Store in order to enable that experience. Now, your second question about Twilio. So Twilio is a partner, is a channel partner of ours. So if you work with Twilio today to say send SMS, you could work with Twilio to send RCS. They essentially would leverage our platform to deliver that to the carriers, just like they leverage their platform and agreements that they have directly with carriers in order to deliver SMS today. So it's to be a similar experience from like the brand or the consumer or the business side.
Thank you very much. The last round of applause for Sean.
Thank you.